On paper, it's currently the toughest game on USC's regular season schedule, and the Trojans survived. Down 2 scores with 5 minutes left, USC wins over Arizona State in the Pac-12 opener, 28-27. We had Pete Ghersen on the line following the game to help us break it down. And Pete, even several days later, it's still a good one to take in, and you got to shake your head to a certain extent in how the Trojans were able to pull it out.
Yeah, Mark, escape is a key word there. And I like one publication I wrote said it's the full Clay Helton experience last week. You get down early, you make your way back into the game, and then you barely win, just enough to hold on to your job, but just enough to make those fans in Troy still angry and still want you out of there. So the Trojans are moving on. They talked about it. They didn't really want to keep going over last week's win. They know they should have played better. They know they were a little sloppy on offense. The defense, especially the linebackers specifically, need to clean up their game. And Todd Orlando, the defensive coordinator for the Trojans, said that clearly this week they need to play a little more violent, a little more aggressive, and, not be so standoffish, because Jaden Daniels didn't really have a big passing game for Arizona State, but he ran for 111 yards on the ground. And it was a lot of broken plays for the Trojans, and those big plays that we talked about, the Trojans are really allowing. So it should be an easier test this week versus an Arizona defense that was the worst in the Pac-12 last year, and obviously lost some key players, including Khalil Tate, their star quarterback last year, and J.J. Taylor, their star running back.
Yeah, so it's a situation where you can look at the USC outcome from last week on to one of two different sides. Either the long-term evaluation would be, okay, we have some concerns here that need to be cleaned up because they might be exposed at some point, or hey, we might have played the best team on the schedule, and even though it looked ugly, we found a way, and now we can improve, and we dodged a bullet. So that's the half empty, half full equation for USC. Just a few injuries to report, but the team's pretty healthy.
Yeah, I mean, they really escaped last week with. I mean, it seems like last year every week we were talking about injuries, especially in the running back unit. All these guys are going down, but you have all 4 running backs healthy. And the only key there's 2 real key injuries. It's the center, Brett Nealon, for the Trojans. He had a sprained ankle, and he was a possibility early in the week to play, but he's definitely not going to play now this weekend, they say. So Justin Dedich is going to take over for him at center. And Clay Helton says he's confident in his skills, and he's been around the program for a few years, so they're not too worried about that. And then Brandon Peely had surgery on a broken finger, defensive lineman for the Trojans, so he won't be out there. But Drake Jackson will be out there, the star sophomore defensive end, and his countermate will be Marlon Tuipulotu, who actually won Pac-12 defensive lineman of the week last week after his good performance with a couple tackles for loss against Arizona State. So he'll be out there, and then the rest of that defense, who picked it up a little bit in the second half, will also be at full strength against a quarterback who's going to be a lot different than we saw Khalil Tate last year. Khalil Tate, obviously a big-time dual threat guy. Grant Gunnell, the quarterback for Arizona, completely different style, full-time pocket passer. He likes to run the RPO offense, and USC's had a tough time facing RPO offenses, so there could be a little dilemma there for the Trojans facing off against Grant Gunnell. And Gunnell kind of has an approach like Keaton Slovis does of USC, where he likes to complete a high percentage of his passes, completed 65% of his passes last year, had 9 touchdowns and only 1 interception. So he should be accurate. He's a big time. He's got a big body. I actually saw him at the Coliseum last year when he relieved Khalil Tate, and that USC blowout was 41-14. And so, I expect him to be a little bit better, but last week's game for Arizona got canceled against Utah because of coronavirus. Some players tested positive on both squads. And so it's going to be tough because Arizona doesn't have the experience. They don't have the reps. This is Grant Gunnell's really first time being in the starting role himself. Yes, he started in place of Khalil Tate last year, but that was because of injury. So, yeah, you could say Arizona had time to scout USC this week. They had more time to get healthy and everything. They got to watch USC play last week. But a defense that's coming in as was the worst in the Pac-12 last year. They lost their last 7 games to end the season last year after winning 4 in a row at one point. It's going to be a tough sledding for them because this Trojans team is, they kind of maybe ironed out some of their kinks last week for Arizona State, and they're going to be hungry to play well, play a clean game, not have 4 turnovers like they had last week. And this Arizona defense is going to be up to a tall task against this wide receiver core, the 4 running backs, and of course, one of the best quarterbacks in the conference in Keaton Slovis.
Yeah, Rich Rodriguez led this program to a division championship in 2014. They went to the Fiesta Bowl that year. That was the high watermark for him. He didn't necessarily leave from a football standpoint. There were a number of issues both on and off the field regarding Rich Rod. Kevin Sumlin comes in after what was a bumpy ride at Texas A&M. A lot of expectations following the early success with Johnny Manziel. Great recruiting classes, but never pulled anything other than a lot of 8-5 finishes once Johnny Football left. Comes to Arizona, 5-win season to start out. As you mentioned, the disappointing finish after getting off against a pretty mediocre non-conference schedule, bulking up the record, then losing in the Pac-12 7 consecutive games to finish at 4-8. So Kevin Sumlin, you would think would be on the hot seat, or in this COVID time of 2020, probably buying himself, regardless of the finish, if he doesn't do well here in 2020, another season in 2021, and then he'll be one of those many coaches on the hot seat for 2021.
Yeah, and Kevin Sumlin, is known usually as a high-profile coach and everything, but you mentioned they started 4-1 last year, lost 7 in a row to finish 4-8, weren't bowl eligible, and he likes to run these spread offenses. He's got some weapons this year. JJ Taylor did graduate, but they've got Gary Brightwell, who in limited time last year, he ran for 300 yards over the season, averaged almost 6 yards per carry. So he's going to take over as the lead back. And then Grant Gunnell's number 1 target is going to be a talented wide receiver in Jamari Joyner, who's a big body and can go make some plays down the field for them. But yeah, really it's a roster that's not quite as deep as some of these other teams in the Pac-12 South, which is already sort of a weaker half of a conference, I'd say. And the defense has really struggled. I mean, they do have some good linebackers. Lorenzo Burns and Jarius Walls are talented and experienced, but the pass rush has struggled over the last year or so, especially last year. Their secondary wasn't that strong, and I don't really expect them to be much better this year. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be, I think, high scoring. And I think USC is going to come into this one with a little chip on their shoulder just because of maybe the media and the fans and how they reacted to last week's little victory by 1 point. The USC is going to want to prove something and put this team away like they did last year at the Coliseum.
They have some proven parts in regards to the coaching staff. In addition to someone, new defensive coordinator Paul Rhodes. He's the former Iowa State head coach, and running the offense is Noel Mazzoni, who's been around forever around college football, specifically in the Pac-12 and earlier in the SEC. 10 returning starters on a defense, but from a defense that's been, in terms of recent history, just plain awful. 34 points a game. They've had the worst scoring defense in the Pac-12 over the past 6 seasons. Talking USC with Pete Ghersen and breaking down the Trojans following that dramatic 28-27 win. They take on the other Arizona school. The Wildcats on the road is a 14-point favorite. That seems to be pretty fair. Haven't made a selection on this one myself, but I would be leaning USC. I know it's a road contest, but Arizona, the first game of the season, I expect USC to improve some of those difficulties, especially on offense, that'll enable them to only score the 14 points through the first 55 minutes of this game. Yeah,
and I think 14 is a lot, obviously, normally for USC. In this instance, I think it's maybe a safer spread to pick because of what we mentioned. Arizona's defense not great. USC's offense is great. And actually, going back to last year's game versus Arizona at the Coliseum, Slovis only threw for 232 yards. I mean, he was accurate. He threw for a couple touchdowns, but they didn't need a massive game out of him. They still put up 41 points because the running backs ran for 201 yards. And Keenan Christian was actually responsible for over 100 of those, and he's the 4th string running back. So if your 4th string running back's picking up 100 yards against this defense, then I think guys like Stephen Carr, Marquis Stepp, Vai Malepeai, and all the wide receivers are healthy. The offense should go off. But one interesting stat to think about, since 2017, USC is 3-10-1 against the spread as a double-digit favorite. USC's won all 14 of those games, with 4 of them coming by 4 points or fewer, and 6 of them were decided by 1 possession. So it's kind of the typical case where USC doesn't cover the spread. We mentioned this last week. We didn't think USC would cover an 11-point spread by Arizona State, but they just did enough to squeak out the victory. This week, though, I'm going to go against that trend. They're 3-10 against the spread when it's double digits. I think they can cover 14. They're minus 600 on money line, so there's not a lot of value there. And then the over-under is 68. Last week, we were talking on the over-under. It was 56 in LA with rain in the forecast for an early morning game with teams' first games of the season. But I think this week, 68. I think Arizona with Grant Gunnell in the pocket can get a couple touchdowns at least. And I have USC scoring at least 40 points themselves, maybe more. And so it's a risky over to take, but 68, I mean, it could be a high-scoring affair. It should be beautiful weather in Tucson. And it could be just an absolute – it could be a thrashing by USC, and it could be high-scoring on both sides.
All right, folks, I'm going to direct you to my Patreon page because we've got an insider look. We've got exclusive live streams. We've got also watch parties, and leading into this, my predictions as well. 16-4 against the spread last week, so we want to keep that up. I was torrid last week, and Pete, you know, that doesn't come around very often, 16-4, but if I could come anywhere close to that for the weekend, we pick all the top 25 games.
All right. Well, I'm gonna have to check out your picks because I don't think I went 16-4 last week. So,
Pete, we appreciate you stopping by, breaking down the Trojans. We expect it to be an intriguing season, one that should lead to the Pac-12 championship game.
All right. Thanks, Mark.